as human beings, we'll get more and more accustomed to AI interacting with us. Today, it feels weird to be interviewed by AI, to talk to an AI avatar for whatever reason. Tomorrow, it might not be as much, and we might feel quite comfortable doing that. And I would argue at some point, we will trust. It's scary, yeah? But we will trust more that AI avatar to have an unbiased perception on what I'm saying rather than a person.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Johnny Campbell, CEO and co-founder of SocialTalent. And this week on the podcast, we're talking with Giorgio Benassi about hiring with AI in fast fashion and premium retail. Giorgio is the global talent acquisition director with Sephora, a brand famous to many of you, or if not directly to you, perhaps to your family, to your mother, to your sisters, to your daughters, to your nieces, or perhaps to your cousin, your brother, your uncle, your auntie, wherever you are in the world. Sephora is a well-known and well-loved brand. And Giorgio has great experience running talent acquisition for large brands. But the world is changing around us. We're seeing the advent of AI, particularly in high volume and particularly retail hiring. And Giorgio has a great deal of experience there that he's going to share with us in the show. Giorgio, you're very welcome to the podcast. You might start by maybe giving some context to your international career, as the accent might be heard as Italian, but you've worked all over the world. Perhaps you can give us a short history of your travels, where you've worked, and what brought you here today.
Thank you for having me, Johnny. Yeah, so I'm Italian. I think you'll spot it very quickly. I worked in a fair bit in Italy, a little bit in the Netherlands, 4 years, where I worked for Philips. Then I worked in and lived in Hong Kong for 8 years, where I worked for Nissan for a little stint, and then 9 years at H&M. And during those 9 years, I moved back to Europe, back to Barcelona, where I am based now, and still am at the moment. All of this, unfortunately, very long at this point career has been in TA. Except probably 3 years at H&M, where I had a broader responsibility as a group head of talent. That included TA, but it had a little bit more than that. For the rest, has been TA, which is a profession I absolutely love, and still keep on working in for a long time.
Giorgio, for some folks, Sephora might not be a familiar brand. It's certainly extremely well known in the US, but even for those who know the brand, they might not know the roots or the ownership of that brand. Could you give us an overview of the organization, I know its place in the wider LVMH family, the size in terms of employees, and some of the hiring volumes that you see in different markets?
Yeah. So you've mentioned it. It's part of the LVMH family since quite a few years now. It's a company. I think at the moment the size it's about 55,000 employees, a little over that. More than half of those are in North America, which is our number one market in terms of size, in terms of revenues, in terms of profits. And of course, France is a very strong and important market. We operate in a European context as well. We have a strong presence in the Middle East, which is growing very, very rapidly. And we have a presence in Asia, primarily in Southeast Asia and in China. But it's a French brand. The brand name isn't French. It was a brand that was acquired by the founder from Boots. It was a brand that Boots had. And then we exited the UK, but kept the brand name, built all our successes around it. And as you would have it, we're re-entering very successfully the UK as we speak in the last few years. And so we're back to the second route of Sephora at the moment.
And Sephora sell beauty products essentially, and probably distinct from other organizations in the LVMH family. They largely sell products from third-party providers. Would that be correct, Giorgio?
Yeah. So Sephora sells, I've said 3 categories. One is third-party products, as you mentioned, from any brand. We have a very, very careful selection of the brands we carry. A lot of the value that we generate is from deciding which brands we carry and which kind of exclusive deals we make in which country. So super critical part of our business. Then we carry brands from LVMH, the Christian Dior's, and so forth. And then we have our own brand, which is called Sephora Collection, which is a brand which a relatively low price point, an entry level brand. That is, however, not the largest part of our revenue. It's still growing, and it's growing well, but it's just one, which is a different experience from what I experienced before at H&M, where everything was something that we had developed, where we had a huge supply chain to handle all of that. It's a slightly different setup here.
As listeners to the podcast might realize, I begin my obsession with the macro of an organization, understanding the scale. So, with a 55,000 person organization, I imagine the large volume of your hiring is retail associates, retail colleagues. Maybe could you give me insight in terms of the typical volumes per year you're hiring for? And maybe what was the old experience of hiring in Sephora before, let's say, the advent of AI or before the project you're currently undertaking?
Yeah. So the old is still the same because the project is a project we are undertaking. I started in Sephora in September. We've completed an analysis of where we are, and we built a roadmap, and we're now starting to execute it. But I'll give you, so the numbers are as follows. We recruit about 33,000 people a year, more or less. I would say 1/3 of that approximately is seasonal hiring, especially around Christmas and some festivities in different parts of the world, where we have spikes in our stores. The rest is either temporary or permanent hiring, and the stores make up, say, 90% of it, more or less. And it's extremely decentralized. There are processes that are set up on a market level. Sometimes there aren't really set processes. It's about store managers figuring out what to do in the moment. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it is extremely decentralized. And if you ask me, as it should be, because in a retail business with the need of moving really fast, and with these level of volumes, in my view of the world of recruiting, speed and closeness to the market and closeness to the business trumps consistency in the process. Yes, it would be great to have a consistent process, but the effort in enforcing that process, designing that process, finding agreement across cultures on such junior levels, it's a really big effort that sometimes it's not worth. It's not worth it. So very decentralized, and we're keeping it like that.
For someone who's 8 months in the job, you sound extremely experienced on this. So maybe I'll park Sephora for a second, and let's jump back into H&M, which is a different type of retail organization for sure, but one where you did initiate a project and were able to see success. So walk me through maybe, H&M for the, again, its scale, its hiring, and talk to me about what led to your first, call it AI driven project or automated project or scaled hiring project, shall we say, that's informed what you're going to do with Sephora.
Yeah. So the scale of H&M, I'm left at what it was when I left in June last year. There might be some changes. So my ex-colleagues at H&M don't quote me on that and don't lynch me if I'm not exact. But it used to be about 125,000 people globally when I left, with the numbers of hiring were fluctuating around 75 to 80,000 hires a year, with this very high turnover, significantly higher than what I'm seeing here at Sephora. Unfair comparison to a certain extent, because the numbers that I have in mind for H&M's turnover relate to 2021, which is a very, very difficult year for turnover globally. But I know H&M has done a lot of work and a lot of success on this front. But 80,000 recruitments a year is definitely a significant volume to deal with. And what we had in mind at that point, like we looked at this, and we had on the one hand, we had the pressure of contributing to reduce turnover, um, but that usually is a longer term journey. Like you need to figure out a lot of different aspects. Some pertain to leadership, some pertain to rewards, some pertain to recruiting the right people, and so there's a lot of different avenues you can go with. And before you start to see great concrete results, it takes a while. In the meantime, we were faced with a challenge of, well, we still need to recruit these people, and the process is very manual. So how do we optimize this process in a way that is good for candidate experience? It gets the right people in the door, and it doesn't take hours and hours of work to for it to happen. And so what we did, we went to an organization to what we did an RFP for an assessment solution. Our idea was we want to remove CV sending when you're applying for entry-level roles in stores. Frankly, yes, there could be a 2% advantage if you worked in a fast fashion competitor before, but that advantage is very, very little. Your experience matters less. You can learn the job. Once you're in the job, we'll teach you the job, and if you're bright, you're going to pick it up very quickly. What we can't teach you is the fact that you get excited when you're solving a problem for a customer, or the fact that you are very service-minded, or that you contribute to the team rather than detract from it. All of these things are more related to your personality, to who you are. So we wanted to get rid of the CV that tells us nothing about that and go straight into an assessment. The first question that came to us was, okay, well, an assessment, the first thing you're thinking is like, oh, psychometric assessment. Yeah, as if new generation would spend 30 minutes answering multiple choice questions to get a retail job. So we partnered with an organization to design an immersive assessment that would bring the applicant immediately as they apply. It would bring them into a store environment on their screen, mobile or desktop, and they would be faced by situational questions connected to the things you might experience in store. And it was a very well designed assessment, honestly, thanks to the capabilities of this specific organization. I'm not going to name names until you ask me to, if you ask me to. And we designed this, we worked with this great assessment. We got a result at the back for the candidates, and then the store managers, who are the ones that are leading that recruitment process, would then prioritize inviting for interviews the candidates that had a better result. And we saw some incredible outcomes right from the start, right from when we started the pilot. We piloted this initially in sort of half of the stores in the Netherlands and a few stores in the US, so relatively small size pilot. We immediately started to see our time to hire going down significantly. We started to see our diversity of recruiting increasing. We started to recruit candidates from different industries and different backgrounds that before we did not select. And here, of course, we're not talking about Yale and Stanford. We're still talking about retail jobs, but we would, for instance, end up focusing more on people with retail experience, while we realized already during the pilot that some of the best candidates were coming from hospitality. And so we widened our talent pool, and were able to recruit better quality candidates, if you can talk about it like that, into our stores. And we've started to roll out in multiple markets. I then left the company, and as I understand, it's now, I think, rolled out in about 80% of the stores of the company globally. And it's contributed significantly in terms of savings, cost savings, in terms of hours spent. I think here the case is also not a case it's a case about hours spent. It's not a case about cutting headcount, because they are saving hours of store managers doing recruitment. So you're not going to reduce the number of store managers because their recruitment is automated. What you're doing is giving them back time to spend with their teams, being a good manager, or with our customers. And while it's very difficult to quantify what that means in terms of increased revenues or increased value or increased engagement in the teams, there is surely a benefit there. Unless we hire the wrong managers, and the more time they spend with the team, the more they hate them. But that would be a different problem.
But there were definitely some hard metrics you shared with me. I know you mentioned the time to hire, I think it dropped almost by half. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. The
And then there was another lagging indicator that was, I thought, super interesting, particularly in your industry, which was attrition. You saw
yeah,
noticeable changes in attrition. Is that correct?
yeah. Yes, I think during the pilot we could not immediately see it. We were just looking at the patient pass rates, and we started to see some signs there, but it wasn't particularly significant. I understand now from the team that the attrition has gone down more than 20%. I don't know the exact figure, but like more than 20%. And of course, we know attrition is a combination of different things, right? It's not just, recruitment's figured it out, so it's solving attrition for everybody. And there's a lot of different things that play into it, but surely our ways of recruiting in store played a role in it.
I imagine they can still tease that apart by looking at the markets that still don't use this service versus the markets that do, and look at those kind of comparisons. Um,
Exactly.
and attrition is where you actually really start saving money because you are literally hiring less people because less people are leaving. I imagine more experienced staff tend to have higher sales figures in terms of how they might work with customers, and then
Yeah,
the cost of just hiring them and onboarding, you reduce that cost because your volumes are lower. So I imagine the P&L for this is expansive. And by the way, sorry, you didn't mention the vendor, but we love mentioning good vendors. If you don't mind sharing who the vendor was and you
yeah.
worked with them, sure. It will be the first question people ask you, Giorgio, and ask in the
Fair
comments.
enough. Fair enough.
Who's the company you used?
Yeah, but we work with a company called Maki People. Is a French company, and at the time it was purely an assessment. I wouldn't, the guys at Maki might disagree with me, but it wasn't necessarily AI per se. It wasn't. You couldn't. It was an assessment. It was well designed. It was immersive, but it wasn't responsive. It wasn't based on LLMs or. At the moment, they have developed AI-based technologies that we are looking into for the Sephora project.
And we've heard stories like this. Last week, I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had four fantastic TA leaders on my panel, including Rachel Allen, who runs global TA for 7-Eleven. And she was sharing the story of how when she'd first taken over the role, they acquired an organization called Speedway. And Speedway had a different tech stack, and they had recruiters doing all the hiring, where 7-Eleven had stores doing the hiring. And so they tried to kind of combine the two, and they inherited a team of 300 recruiters from Speedway. They tried to do the Speedway type hiring for 7-Eleven and hired an extra 100 recruiters, like 400 recruiters, then trying to do centralized hiring or support centralized hiring. And then the business decided they were cutting costs actually and said, we're getting rid of the 400 recruiters. So Rachel was faced with, how do I solve for this? I'm missing 400 recruiters. I got to deliver a service to the business. And so they went with a vendor that they chose, Paradox, I think. And they brought in automated hiring. Again, very similar to what you're doing. Again, different brand, different type of hiring, but retail hiring that wasn't based on a CV or resume. That was based on your proven ability to have capabilities or skills or an attitude, so to speak, to deliver on the hiring. And their volumes, again, I should imagine in retail, really high. They did 120,000 hires a year. 95% of 95% of that was store hires,
Yeah.
and their time to hire dropped from 11 days to 3. And they managed to reduce attrition quite a bit because their attrition was uh, off the charts. Rachel didn't reveal the attrition levels on stage, but she did share with me privately. They were big, as you get in retail, and they managed to bring that down quite a bit, which at that volume of hiring is enormous saving. But the what they had done is store managers were essentially, always on recruiting until they flicked a button to say we're done. So they just kept sending them new people, And it was fantastic. So now the process is you leave the switch on, and then central recruiting keeps sending you people every week for your store until you switch it
Yeah.
off. And then you flag you need it on again, and you get more folks. And we've heard this time and time again. We heard this from Matt in UPS, was sharing how he brought in a similar volume hiring for largely their warehouse operatives and their drivers.
Yeah.
Warehouse, I mean, the distribution centers, and again doing several 100,000 hires a year, automated, reducing the recruiters, improving time, driving down cost, improving the experience. They used Fountain, which is another competitor product. There's lots of these products, lots of companies doing this, right? And we're seeing this kind of flywheel of activity where literally, I can't see a downside. I see cost savings. I say improved hiring experience from the hiring manager or store. I see candidates preferring it, loving it. It
Yeah.
goes faster. Attrition goes down. There's very few downsides to something like this in volume hiring. So knowing your own H&M experience, I know you're familiar with some of these case studies. We've sat in the same rooms, Giorgio, and heard some of the same stories. When you arrived in Sephora and you're approaching this new project for Sephora, first of all, what's different to what you've seen before or seen elsewhere? What's the same? And what is your vision for hiring in Sephora going forward?
Yeah. So what is the same is that we're talking about staying segment hiring. It's still high volume recruitment. It's still people with limited to no experience, and the focus is still on more on who they are as people rather than what they've done before in their careers. So the challenge also remains very, very comparable. We need to make sure that we have the right assessment capabilities for these skills. It might seem trivial, but it isn't, and we can talk more about it. But an AI agent that does recruiting and that takes over parts of the work that the store manager is doing or the recruitment team is doing doesn't, it can do the trick, but you need to know what you put inside of it so that the output you get at the back of is actually credible assessment of that skill or that competency, which is not trivial as a process. So of course, what I would say is different at Sephora at this stage is I think the profession of a beauty advisor compared to the profession of a sales advisor requires an industry specific at least interest that and passion that we need to assess. So I would say there is, especially for some roles in our stores, there is a little bit of experience that plays a role. We're still talking about high volume retail roles, so it's not so critical. But for some roles, it starts to play a little bit. So we need to balance out the two factors. And then I think it's important to note that Sephora is a premium brand, and even if the brands we carry in store are not our brands, the brand on the door means that people walking in expect a certain level of service and to be taken care of in a certain way. The amount of people you find in a Sephora store compared to many other retailers, talk about fast fashion in general, it's the same everywhere. It's significantly higher. There's many more beauty advisors in a store in Sephora because the customers expect to be supported and serviced and advised based on their skin complexion, on their skin tone. I'm not an expert myself, so don't quote me on the details. Uh, yeah, exactly. So you need to make sure that the level of service that these people provide is right there where our customers expect it to be. Um, so it, to a certain extent, is a little less mass volume and a little bit more premium. But again, it's nuances in the context of high volume hiring. It's still high volume.
We did talk about this before we went to record, but some examples of the hiring process that some organizations have brought in is end to end literally, begin application all the way to job offer made at the end of the process. Both in H&M and I believe your plans for Sephora are to still maintain that human touch and decision making at the end. So this is about how do you get to interview
Yeah,
in an automated fashion. Is that correct?
yeah, completely. I think where we want to go in the future is that we would like to guarantee everyone that applies and that has an interest in Sephora to get an interview, which is a big statement before AI. It was an impossible statement before AI, but it's technically possible now. And I think this is where the perspective sort of around AI should change from my point of view. Um, it's not about being interviewed by AI. Is about replacing CV sending with an interview. If you prefer CV sending, be my guest. But I think for everyone's best interest, both the company and the person, having a conversation with an AI agent is a significantly better experience, more tailored, and something where you can express yourself a lot better than putting a CV on paper and then putting some words on a piece of paper. But of course, it doesn't end there. For us, as you mentioned, it's important to maintain the human connection, the human touch, and the human judgment at the end of the process. So as we will proceed to implementing these new tools, and we haven't identified who is the vendor or exactly how we're going to roll it out, but there will definitely be an evaluation that is done before we move into scheduling interviews. So AI is not going to take a decision. AI is going to inform a decision that a person is going to review all the information and take a decision. And then it will probably be another AI tool of some kind that schedules interviews that end up being in the agenda of store managers if we talk about volume hiring. But we need to maintain that human side of it. I would say in the short term and in the medium term, I cannot foresee it any different. Long term, it's really hard to say because I think as human beings will get more and more accustomed to AI interacting with us. Today, it feels weird to be interviewed by AI, to talk to an AI avatar for whatever reason. Tomorrow, it might not be as much. And we might feel quite comfortable doing that. And I would argue at some point, we will trust, it's scary, yeah? But we will trust more that AI avatar to have an unbiased perception on what I'm saying rather than a person. Which is not too far from the truth already today, but the perception is not easy to change.
I love that idea. Like I think back to maybe this is a bad analogy, but I think back to the AirPods, right? So I have in-earphone thingies here, and I remember I bought my first AirPods in the beginning of 17. They were announced and released for Christmas 2016, but just over 8-9 years ago they came out to the market, and it was weird. People walking around with these earphones that had no wires, and they were on phone calls talking to themselves. It just
Yeah.
felt weird and looked weird. We don't think about it today. I bought a pair of those Meta Air Ray-Bans there a week or two ago, and it looks a bit odd. Somebody talking on the phone with a pair of sunglasses, and you can't see a phone. But again, your point, it increasingly becomes normalized. We all accept it, and it becomes part and parcel of what we do. It might take 5-10 years. I have no idea how long these things take. But to your point, I do agree that today it feels awkward, weird, and you get a lot of pushback even from folks who they'll listen to your story, Giorgio, and say that's great for retail hiring, never ever in professional hiring. And I wouldn't personally make such a bold statement because I think we all get used to these things. Maybe it's first in retail hiring, and increasingly you'll see many more parts of this come into professional hiring. Have you thought about that? Because obviously it's not just
Yeah,
store hiring that you do. You do corporate hiring and everything else.
Yeah.
So where do you stand on that?
I think from where I see it today in our ways of working, I wouldn't automate as much as I would in terms of the 100% of the process for volume. I would automate more than I would for corporate hiring. But I think, again, gradually, I would love to move assessing capabilities towards AI because if it's well designed, it's a better assessor than a human being. uh, and then complement that with human assessment so that we have both sides of the analysis. Um, and I think this is going to dramatically change the role that recruiters will play in this game. We used to be either the gatekeeper or the candidate seeker. And in the future, I think it's going to be more of a relational role that we're going to play. Is about how you stay close to people as they go through all of these assessments. But you're not going to be the person that says, yes, you're the best, you're the silver medalist. It will be more explaining what the company is about, staying close to them, making them feel that there's a human connection in the company, even if they'll end up being assessed on their project management skills or on their C# capabilities by an assessment tool of some kind, really high powered. So there's plenty of room for application of that in the corporate world.
Giorgio, I'd love to go down that road and tangent with you right now. Genuinely, I think we could do another 30 minutes. I'm conscious of your time, and I'd love to maybe, as we draw to a close, what have been your learnings to date from the project with H&M, which I know you didn't fully complete, you had to hand over, and the project you're building for Sephora? Lots of
Yeah.
other TA leaders are going to be listening to this podcast, hopefully, or at least one person listening and wondering, how can I learn? Because I'm excited about this. I want to do this in my own business. And they'll have a different set of requirements. They'll be, even if they're doing volume hiring, not all volume hiring is the same, as we've discussed, or maybe they're
Yeah.
doing professional hiring. Are there any lessons you can share for any leader listening to this about how you've approached it, what works, what doesn't work
Yeah.
in looking at these kind of projects?
Yeah. So I think I would say two things. One is cast your net wide. There is a lot that is happening in this space at the moment globally. There's a ton of vendors. There's a ton of vendors that were in a different space and they're jumping on this bandwagon. You need to learn as much as possible about who does what and to what extent and how do they integrate and how do they complement each other as tools. And then for me, the biggest learning that I am gathering as we speak, primarily in the context of the support project, is while AI agents are popping up everywhere, going back a little bit to what I was saying before, it's the assessment capabilities that are going to play an important role. I've been speaking to vendors, and they've been positioning it as in, look at this fancy tool. It's going to ask the questions. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. Yep. Like, what questions? Like, how do you assess this? Oh, we don't know how we assess this because with all of our data points and a billion blah blah blah, then it figures out that this person is a creative person. I'm like, yes. Is there any structure? I mean, I understand there is technology and a level of understanding of these models that people like me don't have. So there is a certain degree of trust you need to put. Then you need to validate that trust. But there are clearly some vendors that have a strong framework in assessing skills and capabilities, and other vendors that just have an AI agent. And I would argue every one of us needs assessment capabilities because that's what we're going to put these AI agents to do.
I love that. It's don't get obsessed with the tech and the bells and whistles. Look at the fundamentals of the job to be done. Does it assess for the competency, qualities, values you're trying to assess for? Does it do it well? Is there a robust scientific model behind that that's evidence-based, that you can test? I guess this is the whole idea of a black box. You need to be able to understand what drives it, not just the AI will figure that stuff out. That doesn't work to hire 30, 40,000 people and do a good job for the business. There's a lot of responsibility in your role, in other tier leaders' roles, to deliver the right talent to the business. And you place a lot of faith in these tools, and just don't do it because it has a nice UI, the extra product features than the next competitor. We're thinking about this ourselves, Giorgio. I think I shared to you, we're building, in interview and recruiting assistants that we'll be launching later this year. And there's lots of vendors in the space. And we're coming at it from the perspective of what does the science say about what works. And I personally play around with these tools. I was building some GPTs last night, and off the shelf, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, their recommendations for like what to ask in an interview, how to run an interview, they don't stand up. Like they're okay some of the times, but
Yeah.
largely as an experienced recruiter and educator in the space, I look and go, that's not the way you should do it. And there's a
Mm.
danger in a nice tool that says, look, it'll give you interview questions. But to your point, are they the right interview
Yeah.
questions? Should
Yeah.
I be asking questions, or should I have a situational assessment? Should I have a case study? What's right
Yeah.
for this role in this situation on scale for my organization that I can prove will actually get me better talent? That's what the fundamentals are.
Yeah. And an experienced interviewer knows how to pivot and how to shift live during an interview, which these tools aren't yet capable of doing. And having said that, though, I would argue in the long run, it's going to be easier to train these tools to be good than it will be easier to train all of our hiring managers in the world to be expert interviewers. So
Mm.
it's a
I
balancing
I lo
act.
I love your point. I listened to I'll finish on this note, which is I listened to a great podcast around sales and revenue, kind of sales and marketing technology. And the, the presenter, Jason Lemkin from SaaStr, was talking about how the technology he saw 6 months ago, he dismissed. It wasn't good enough, and he was poo-pooing the whole sector, and he realized 6 months in AI is a long time. Keep an open mind. It may not do it today. That doesn't mean it's never going to do it. In fact, it could do it a lot quicker than you think. So I love your open mindedness. I love that focus on where we'll eventually go. Don't put dates on it. But Giorgio, it's
No,
been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, as it always is. I'm really glad you got to share your insights with our audience as well. And if you don't mind, maybe we can come back and talk to you in a year or so when the project is up and running in Sephora, when maybe the world has moved on, we're using AI in different ways, and we can lament on what's next for us to do.
I will be very glad to. And thank you for having me today, Johnny.
A pleasure. And ciao. We'll see you soon, Giorgio. And a big thank you to
Ciao.
you, the listener, for joining us today on the podcast. We'll be back again next week with another great episode and a great guest to share with you what's happening to drive hiring excellence in the world today. Until then, take care and goodbye.